Hi everyone, my name is Natalie. Today I wanted to do another Curious Adventure video. So Curious Adventure is a year-long nonfiction reading challenge that I have started and that I'm hosting throughout the year. Basically it is 12 prompts or challenges that are all about nonfiction and basically meant to inspire you to maybe read more nonfiction than you would normally do, or to just broaden your horizons within nonfiction. It's supposed to be a fun challenge, and I really urge you to interpret the challenges however you want and however you feel like they suit your reading tastes or preferences. All of the information about the challenges can be found in my announcement video, which I will link below. I've also done a blog post with listing all of the challenges, and if you are interested in joining in on Curious Adventure, just use the hashtag Curious Adventure wherever, on whatever social platform you use, so that I can find your things. So that, I think, was all I wanted to say about Curious Adventure. I feel like I always want to at least introduce that before getting into the thing. So today I wanted to talk about the book that I read for the second challenge, which is to read a book about an experience different from your own. I ended up reading Notes on Blindness by John M. Hull. This is a memoir slash journal. It's really a journal of John Hull's experience of blindness during the 1980s. This book is him grappling with blindness as an experience and something that he of course has very complicated feeling about. I felt like it was very eye-opening and thought-provoking in the different ways that the world as we know it is completely built upon the idea of sight and of everyone being able to see. There's so many things systematically that this is built into the world and our communication and our understanding of work, of love, of other people, of control and agency. Reading this book for me was really eye-opening in the sense that I was forced to see certain things that I had definitely taken for granted and hadn't really considered before. And so I found it such a rewarding and important and challenging book to read for that reason, and I felt like it was the perfect book to read specifically for Curious Adventure, or to talk about in connection to Curious Adventure. So basically I'm going to talk about three sort of themes of points in the book that I found particularly interesting. So the first sort of theme is his blindness as an experience, and some of the limitations and some of the challenges in living with blindness. So one of the things that he talks about is his inability to forget about his disability. Being so dependent on something means that you are never allowed the luxury of forgetting that dependence. And something that I think is relevant for a lot of mental illness as well. Some experiences are impossible to forget about because they shape everything about your life and everything about the way you see the world or the way you move through the world. Another aspect sort of connected with this is his the inflexibility of blindness. So he talks about, for example, the fact that a blind person is completely dependent on repetition, on familiarity, and on predictability of the world. Being able to know sort of your route to work, or being able to predict what happens when you do a certain thing, when you move through a room, who is in the room, and all of those things. Being able to know things because of repetition, because of patterns, means that you are not able to do spontaneous things. One way he talks about this being a limitation is the relationship with other people, especially making new friends. He talks about an example of this is when he goes to the bar and he isn't able to just start off a conversation because he can't always tell if there's anyone there at all. If you can't hear sort of the distinction of one individual, not being able to know sort of if there's someone there, when is the appropriate time to start a conversation, if they just leave in the middle of the conversation, not being able to tell. So there is this sort of vulnerability in making new acquaintances. In being successful in anything that he does, he is dependent on the structure of things, so that blindness doesn't get in the way of his doing the things he wants to do. Because John M. Hole is a very social, outgoing person, he talks especially about the sense of loss of the social life that he had, or the kind of ease of the social life that he had, and that he isn't able to participate in the same way as a blind person. In connection with the social life, he also talks about the inability to see faces and body language, facial cues and body language, as part of his blindness, not being able to have these communication or conversations with people of a more spontaneous or light kind of tone. They're never as casual as he maybe wants them to be. Throughout the book, he talks a lot about the experience of blindness as a one-way street. This sort of internalized feeling a lot of the time, being inside yourself and not knowing what's out there. And also he talks about something that I found really interesting, as him almost forgetting sometimes that he has a face, almost the feeling of him forgetting that other people can see him because he can see them. He also does talk a lot about the, I guess, unexpected benefits or some of the things that he has gained from being blind. So especially, I think, very strongly he talks about the sense of it's very difficult to multitask as a blind person. You can't just half-ass through things because you sort of lose your place, both physically and mentally. And so he talks about the fact that he is much more focused on his work and just is much more deliberate with everything that he does, and that being one of his strengths, especially to do with work. The fact that he can so deeply go into something because he can't do all of the things at once, so it allows him to just choose one thing to be really dedicated to. The other gain he talks about is the senses thing, the fact that the senses grow stronger because of the need for them to grow stronger. So one thing, of course, is the sense of hearing, being able to locate people based on their voices and their steps and things like that. But he also talks about something that I found especially interesting in almost, I think, the lack of noise. He talks about vague solidity and physical pressure when he talks about walking outside and sensing that there is a building there, sensing when there's an open space and sensing when there's an obstacle, and sort of what kind of obstacle based on the sound around it. The different kind of sounds that allows him to internally visualize a kind of world, although it isn't necessarily a visualization, but there's still a sort of blueprint of the world through the use of hearing. One of the things that he mentions in terms of some misconceptions to do with blindness is the navigation being more difficult, or that people who are not blind think that navigation in places like stairs or uneven surfaces would be more difficult than open spaces. He talks about it like places with texture. It is easier for him to locate himself within it. With an entirely open space, it makes it almost as if he is floating. There's nothing to grab onto. But the last thing I wanted to say in terms of the gaining of the senses, he also, towards the end of the book, he talks about blindness as a whole body seer and blindness as a state. The fact that you see with your hearing, you see with your body and with the skin, with touch. So touch in the sense of physical, like stretching out your hand to touch something, but also the skin being more almost sensitive to the air around you, and so that also being a way to read the world. Although he's lost his sight, he still has a vision, but it's just using other kinds of senses. Lastly, I wanted to touch on a few of the things that he talks about in terms of non-blind people, their interpretation of blindness. So one, of course, a central theme throughout the book is the fact that sight is an inbuilt standard of the world. People want to help him as a blind person, but them being not always the kind of help that he wants or needs. For example, being forcefully guided into a specific location or route. One example he gives is when he's asking for his location, when he's lost his way, and he asks, "Where am I?" The people who sees him ask, "But where are you going?" so they can lead him into the right direction. But he just asks for his immediate location so he can find his way. And the fact that people just can't accept that he can take care of himself, I think, is the kind of belittling that happens unintentionally through this not knowing what blindness is. I think that was such an important part of the book for me. So he talks about some of the misconceptions that people have and the unasked for help that he gets, and the way that people treat him, often in ways that makes him feel like he loses a lot of agency, and the frustrating feelings connected with that, understandably. But he also talks about the sort of unexpected problems with people helping him, and the fact that because they are helping him, they are also often making it more difficult for him to do things. So for one example of that is when someone will see him walking with a stick, and they will start to talk with him and walk alongside him and guide him. And that means that because they're talking, he can't use his hearing to navigate. So he is then completely dependent on the other person to guide him correctly. The way that people see him as unable to navigate is because of this fact. And I think I felt very strongly throughout the book that he shows some of the challenges that comes with blindness that isn't actually about your own blindness, but the way that people treat you and the way that the world lacks understanding for it. Having to sort of come to terms and come to grips with his blindness for himself, but also as a parent, and trying to communicate his experience to his kids and trying to make them understand what it means. And that being a complicated thing, especially because of the way that other people see it, and the kids hearing about blindness from other people other than him as well. So I think throughout the book you get a very nuanced, balanced, complicated exploration of blindness as an experience, both in the ways that it limits and is challenging and struggles throughout that experience, but also some of the, as I said, some of the gains from that, some of the things that might change your life, not all in negative ways. So I thought that this was a fantastic book, and I would definitely recommend it. So that was all I want to talk about today. I would love to know if you have done this challenge already for Curious Adventure and what book you read. Also, if you've read this book, I would love to know your thoughts about it. I hope you're having a good day despite all of the craziness of the current times, and I will talk to you soon.